Hi, David Odell here with Odell Complete Concrete. This is part two of a two-part series. What we're going to be doing here is putting concrete from the house all the way to the block wall. There is a footing that is a little high right there. You can see it on the right. We're going to have to chip that down a little bit. It's just one little area about 6 feet long. We got to take it down about 2 to 3 inches. Now back here on this corner of the lot, we're going to be setting up this little curb, concrete curb, 6 inches wide, 4 inches deep. And it's also going to have some number 3 rebar running horizontally in it all the way around, tying into patios on either end. In the back of that planter, what we did is we just did straight grade slope from the house to the planter bed, and then we just positioned some drains in there that are going to exit out in the front lawn through a pop-up bubbler. So that string line there that we have set to top of form, we're going to place the form. That's inside of form. If you set your string to the outside, your stakes are going to interfere with your line. So you always want to set your string to the inside of the form. Right at this end of the house, we're going to put a header right across there, form work 2x4 to stop the concrete from entering into the artificial turf area. Now we're just grading and fine tuning it. Then we'll run the plate compactor over everything, and we'll be ready to start setting some forms and laying some rebar. Having some issues with this compactor. It was set for about 2 weeks, and for some reason the gas went bad in a couple weeks, and I ended up just disassembling the entire carburetor on the site here. Now right against the house, what we're doing here is we're installing some expansion foam, and I'm just gluing that on there with some 3M spray adhesive. I snapped the red chalk line on the side of the house, and then I'm gluing the foam right to that chalk line. So it works a couple purposes. It helps you scrape the concrete off and get it nice and flat because you have a good guide to follow. And then also it allows for any movement between the wall and house. Now right here what we're doing is we're bringing in the base for the artificial turf. And we did this before the concrete because we're going to work right through this project. I mean, if we had poured the concrete to start with, then had to wheel the base over it, there's a chance of damaging fresh concrete, or you might have to wait a couple weeks. But we went ahead and put all the base in before the concrete went in. That way, we could just work the very next day after the pour on the same site. This particular material here that we're putting in is just some gravel and clean sand. So what this is going to do, a lot of times you use a road base for your artificial turf and it doesn't drain as well as this particular blend. So by using this, the water will drain through the turf and into the natural ground much quicker without any runoff. Here's our number 3 rebar going in. Now the layout on this rebar is every 2 foot. Now this rebar goes through that mow strip and all the way around to the other patio. And we're pouring all of this in one day. And you can see part 1, but in this particular part you'll just see this side yard pour and the mow strip or curb for the planter. Well, it's pour day. It's morning of the pour day. Where it's about 6 a.m. Concrete should be here shortly. The pump is going to get here a little sooner to do setup. But here's what we're looking at right now. We've got a nice chalk line. We've got all our rebar tube centers. We've got expansion foam glued to the house. Foam wrapped around the gas pipe. Now let's go into let's look over here what we have. Here we have your 6-inch wide curb or mow strip. That's going to contain the artificial turf that goes in this area. All right, this is pour day. We got the pump in here. This is a 3/8 concrete mix, 3,000 psi. No fly ash. I've got this little hook that I use to pull up the rebar as we go out. And this is a nice slump right here. You can take a look at that, and that's about how wet you'd want to pour something like this. It's easy enough to still work, but yet it's going to be much more durable than concrete that's too wet. This is a 12-foot aluminum screed, so it's always straight. The bad news is here that we ran out of concrete. We're probably about 4 wheelbarrows short, I would say. This is a 10-yard pour, so that's the most you can put on these concrete trucks in this area. So there's nothing we could do about that, but we thought we would make it based on the square footage, but obviously I had it graded a little too deep based on the math to get it with 10. So what we did, knowing it was deep anyway, I ended up cutting kind of a swell through this entire backyard. You'll see we've ran out already. Of course, there's concrete in the hopper of the pump and hose, so that gets you down here pretty close after you fill up the hopper to back flush all the concrete out. So we've rotted it once at this point. We're going to start rotting it again to pull enough concrete in here. So we rotted it right here on an angle, and it kind of gave us a swell all the way through and funneled the water right out the gate. If you have to get a cleanup load or a second load delivered, even for a yard or less, they're minimal to deliver is a yard anyway, but it's going to cost you probably $600 or $700 for that 1 yard delivered. You don't want to run into that situation. Here's Jose. He just went across that with a hand float, ran his edger. And this concrete's going off really good because it was we poured it stiff and it was 3,000 psi, so it's a little higher psi than just your average residential patio. Then also we've got fiber mesh in here. We have Buckeye fiber, and then of course I always request no fly ash, so that helps it set up, because instead of getting fly ash as a substitute for cement, when the cement is really doing all the reaction, and that's what making the concrete hard, I just go with more cement, not use a substitute. It does set up a little faster though. But I like the use of the idea of fly ash in concrete to dispose of. I'm sure there's huge quantities of fly ash that are just waste material, and to mix it in concrete and get rid of it, it's a great idea. It reminds me of when they mixed asbestos with concrete, something to that. We're going to hit this twice by hand. We've already hit it with walking tools, and it's difficult to really work it out with poles in a situation like this, especially when we're sealed off from the backyard at this point. Because you can see in part one how we poured all the way around this entire house. So we did a lot of wall walking on this job. Here we are brooming it. We got the horsehair broom out. And I put some nice big fat sandals on to support myself on the concrete without leaving any deep impressions. That way it's easier to trowel out when you get off of it. And right here I'm just using my painter's pole, the way you typically see a painter run a roller on. You notice there's no control joints in this. Well, that's because we're going to be saw cutting it the very next day. Within 24 hours, I believe, or 22 hours is the longest you can wait. Here's your concrete curing compound going on. And what this does is it allows me that extra time to get the saw cutting in here. Because without the curing compound on a hot day like this, you'd have cracks in the morning. And in some cases, it could be cracks even with control joints when it's setting up this quick. And you can just crack everywhere, kind of like peanut brittle. This is the curing compound we just sprayed on there. You see some of it's pretty clear already. Still got a little color left in it there. But it gives it a little gloss at the same time. Concrete curing compound makes a big difference too. I've seen them crack, some areas where you didn't spray, and then other areas where did get sprayed, and you could really see it firsthand. Here's the layout on your saw cuts. I will put a couple cuts in that curb as well. Our cuts are going to be about 7-foot sections is what we're shooting for here, maybe a little less. You know something about concrete, and when I offer these concrete jobs with warranties, one of the benefits of the warranty that I offer, I guarantee it and warranty it against fire and theft. In unlimited lifetime on that. Here's your Medusa, and I'm using cordless vacuum to get it. Gets about 90% of the dust. Just after cutting this job up, approximately 800 square feet, I had probably 6 pounds of dust that I was able to generate just on this little bit of saw cutting. Now, if I could find a use for that dust, maybe I could throw it in some thin set or maybe some mortar. I don't know. Where do you think it would go good in concrete too? Yeah, just throw it back in the concrete. It would be a lot cleaner. And that was your 9-inch DeWalt right there. Just finishing up the cuts to the wall. Also, I'm going to go ahead and pressure wash this entire area. I pressure wash it the very next day right after saw cutting, and it does a few different things. It gets the concrete off the walls, any splatter, while it's still fairly fresh. And also, I'm water curing the concrete at the same time and blowing off the residual cut dust, as you can see right there. But that little swell worked out really nicely in here. You directed it out that gate real quick. That pressure washer knocks the splatters right off the house. And another thing you can find out real quickly is how good the paint is or how solid the stucco is. So as soon as you start hitting it with the pressure washer, you're going to discover all those things really quick. And now if it was to start blowing off, then you'd have to say that, well, it's probably time to paint everywhere. Because in order to prep for paint, you have to pressure wash anyway. And that way, I kind of got half the job done. So now all I gotta do is paint the thing. Here's the next little base I'm finishing up the basin with. This is gonna get all artificial turf over the top of this. So we're using galvanized 6-inch nails to hold it all down. And we put these, especially around the perimeter, about every 4 to 6 inches apart. And then you're probably going to have a nail every 2 feet from one another in every direction all through the field of this. So it's not going anywhere, in other words. Initially, while those nails are still rust free, you could pull the sod up pretty quickly in the first year. But after that, those nails start becoming one with the ground with all the rust and corrosion, and it's nearly impossible to pull it off at that point. This is all the very next day, by the way, right after pour day. This is happening, and you can see how fast this concrete's curing out. We're about, shoot, it was about 90 degrees on this whole job. Pretty hot right down here within about 15 miles of the beach, Southern California. The reason you see that grass laid out at that point, because you have to acclimate the sod to the environment before you lay it down and nail it. Otherwise, it may stretch or retract on you. Well, after you get it down, and then it's gonna, you get a lot of wrinkles in it. In other words, so lay it out in the sun for at least 4 hours, and then spread it and stretch it. We did have one seam on here because the other direction we're over 15. I think we're about 23 or 25 feet. So the seam we cut kind of on a meandering pattern. That way it's not as obvious. I've seen some of these areas, even large projects, where they have a straight line seam and they stand out like a sore thumb. I mean, probably to the average person they wouldn't notice a seam, but someone that's installing it and does it quite often, they can kind of see it pretty obviously. That was a power brush. We're brushing in some number 30 silica sand just to get it in between the blades, and what it does is it keeps the blades standing straight up. The maintenance on this artificial turf is pretty simple. There is no maintenance really for quite some time, so that's how simple it is. I mean, you may have to change the sand or clean it with some kind of deodorizer after about 2 years. May do it every 2 years, do something like that, just deodorize, and then do a sand change after about 10 years. You'll be good to go. Anyway, thanks for watching the video. If you like these kind of videos, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification button, and then you'll be notified as soon as the video posts. You'll be able to watch them right away. And then you might be able to say I'm first in the comments or something like that, because that's always a big challenge right there in itself, because you never know where I'm going to drop one, because it's pretty random, I have to say. Anyway, have a good one. Out.